Welcome back. In Gabon, the military leaders who seized power in that country say the former leader, Ali Bongo, can now leave Gabon after the coup there 2 weeks ago. The coup in Gabon comes after coups in Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali. These countries have also been hit by an insurgency led by the group ISIS in West Africa. Sipho Mantula is a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs. Sipho, good afternoon to you and thanks for your time. Each of these coups will have their own story. Each of these nations will have their own story. But are there similarities in what's happening that's led to these coups?
Afternoon, Stephen, even to the viewers. Indeed, there are some similarities or even the same patterns of these military coups. But let's take your viewers back to the 1960s. In the early 1963, the first military coup in Africa was in Togo. And you will understand that all those military coups are looking at 2 or 3 issues. The weakness of the state. Secondly, the mismanagement of the state, and also the allegation of corruption by those who are in power. So you look in all the 3 cases, whether it's from Guinea-Conakry, from Ouagadougou, you look at Niger, you look at Gabon, all those patterns are coming out also on the issue of the economic challenges that are facing the Sahel region. But also, let's look also, those military coups are also there's also the part of elections. Whenever there's a dispute on electoral results, you find that there is a tension amongst those who are involved in the elections, and the military not willing also to give power to those who are new into the presidency. So that's where we are finding challenges in these military coups in the African continent, but also the African Union and the regional bodies. They might be having many documents, frameworks, resolutions, but I still think that we have the missing link between civilians, the citizens, as well as the leaders on the ground.
Sipho, in some cases it looks like it's really people who know each other. In Niger, it was the head of the Presidential Guard who led the coup. In Gabon, also the head of the Presidential Guard, a cousin of the president who took over. Are these really fights between people in the elite?
No, correct. I think you have pointed it right. You will understand Guinea-Conakry when Alpha Conde was removed. Mamadou was very close to Alpha Conde. You look also at Brice Nguema. He was the head of Presidential Guard of the father of Ali Bongo. You look at the president, Traore, also being very close to Damiba. So the issues, yes, there is a tension of power. Hence you find reshuffling now lately coming from Rwanda, Cameroon, Guinea-Bissau now of the heads of presidential guards. But I think one other aspect also, SG, is that most of these young leaders who are overthrowing their heads of state, they are also being trained by the US, most of them. So you find that there is also the similarity of them receiving the same training from the foreign countries, but the tension also is around the power relations between the head of security, the chief of staff, and the presidency. But also, like I said, the political actors also. We might not leave the role of the political parties or the actors whenever there are electoral disputes.
There's so many different issues because in some countries we've seen these coups being supported by people. Now people are on the streets. Now it's easy, if you're the military and you've just taken power, it's probably pretty easy to get people on the streets. They can wave flags, etc. Is it possible to know if these military governments really are popular? How do we even assess that?
Stephen, what you are raising is very important because we will normally say that the masses or the civilians, they are pro the coup, but they don't have option because the masses, they don't have the ammunition, they don't have the force that they can meet against their government. The only force that they have is to go and vote, is to even protest. But the military has a military advantage of being close to power, also having ammunition to can overthrow government. But most of the masses, yes, we have the anti-French sentiment that we are seeing in the Sahel region, and those are justified in terms of the economic challenges that they are facing. And in some instances, we see them leaning towards China and Russia, leaning towards other African countries, but the challenge is that most of the masses are also not supportive of the military coup. Look at Gabon. Gabon has pushed to say, but it seems that it is in the name of the father, the son, and the cousin. And it was a shame coup. It was a family arrangement. Why don't we also have a civilian government being restored? It's the same issue that came from Mali, the same issue that came from Niger, where people were asking that, can't we have a military going back to the barracks and have civilians governing their own country?
There's so many other aspects to it, because it seems that most of these coups have taken place in Francophone Africa, the parts of Africa that were colonized by the French. Now, I mean, this is very complicated, but why would it be those countries and not other countries?
Even I will say to you also that this pattern of West Africa and the French colonial history, that's what also become the push and the pull factor. It doesn't mean that in your East Africa they've never been coups in Uganda. Southern Africa, I think, we have not experienced military coups. I mean, there have been failures also. We know that we'll all want to talk about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, it was no military coup, it was arrangement also. But when you look at the Sahel region, I think it's the issue also of the natural resources. I might not have touched it on my intro, but the issues of natural resources and the superpowers and the foreign countries having more than 3 decades of control of those natural resources have pushed it. And also the elders or the former leaders who have been leading these countries and their families and their dynasty has also caused attention because they've been benefiting alone without their own communities. And that also has been the push and the pull factor of this civil unrest and military coups that are happening. But also the lack of capacity and the training of our military that have been receiving from the French, from the US. That shows also that the African continent and the African military groupings are not focusing on training our own people. We are still relying on the military knowledge and intelligence from outside. So there's a need for us to work on building our own internal capacity.
So the risk, of course, and I mean, the question really, probably the important question, is whether a coup is good or bad for the ordinary people of a country. And it would seem to me, and I realize I come from South Africa, we have a young but a strong democratic tradition. In the end, it doesn't seem like a military government necessarily governs for the people. It says it does. Sometimes they do restore democracy. We've seen in Nigeria military leaders taking over really from an undemocratic system to almost impose a democracy and doing it correctly, I think. But in the end, are coups normally bad for people, for the average person?
It's not even whether it's good or bad. Coups are actually disturb the progress and even development of any country. Remember that even like as I earlier spoke about from the 60s where there were military coups, from 2009 the AU came with a Zuluni framework to look at this push and the pull factors. But whether it's a good coup or a bad coup, Stephen, I don't think it's neither here nor there. The main issue is to go back to African democratic practices to say how do we transfer power? Because military coups also are part of the transfer of political power, power relations, and that's where there is a tension. Hence, I can say to you, whether all the coups that have happened in the past 3 years, 7 of them, whether they were bad or good, the main issue is that will they also restore the civilian rule? And others will say, but what is the civilian rule? It's basically the democratic processes of electing those who have to be in governance, in executive, because the military belongs to the barracks. The military, their sovereignty is to protect their own country. It's not to be in the executive or in parliament. And that's where we are lacking this, meaning we are going back to the 60s and 70s where we know in Africa it has been the one-party state, it has been military governments, and after 1990 we saw this multi-party democracy and the role that we have to separate the military and the civilian relations. So in short, I'll say to you, there is no bad or good coups, Stephen. It's the same like I say, is it a coup or is it just a shameful coup like in Gabon? It has been labeled as a shameful coup. And also other coups not being coup where we see the military just bringing their own to be the head of state and others bring their family members to become the heads of state.
There are many other things that are going to happen, and the real fear, I suppose, is that we could have more coups on our continent. And there are several things that are happening in Sahel. Of course, there's the stress of the insurgency led by ISIS. We have high food prices. Part of that's the Black Sea grain deal, all of those issues. There's also, I hate to put it like this, but there's the idea that someone can take power. Do we need to worry there could be more of them, Sipho?
No, Stephen, we have to be worried about the spread and the impact of these military coups that are happening, because one of the issues is the communities also, or the citizens also not being happy with the state of governance, as I said, to say coups are also linked with the state power. Coups are also linked with the former colonizers. But in some instances in Africa, whether East Africa or North Africa or Southern Africa, we have to be concerned, because in some instances the coup doesn't come from also outside. It comes internally. And as we said earlier, reshuffling also of the chief of staff, the head of the paramilitaries, the head of the military, the chief of staff of the military, are those issues that will have to be looked into. But I think what is important is for the governments in Africa to give service to their citizens, to be honest, to be transparent, so that they can avoid these military coups, because the military coup, like I said, Stephen, they have a negative effect. They will delay progress, development in many African countries. It also undermines the project of African democracy in Africa. So the more military coups we are having, it means that we are going to the military regime of the 60s and the 70s. So it is important for us to look at what can be an element for us to have an early warning also. How do we even see that? And also the issues of elections, Stephen, the issue of elections being stolen, the rigging of elections in Africa also are the push and the pull factors of this military coups, and the issue of the foreign powers, like I've said earlier, the interest and the appetite of foreign powers in our natural resources, they will also push the military to overthrow their current state and also to overthrow the foreign powers.
You mentioned Zimbabwe, Sipho, and you talk about elections which have been stolen, and of course the claim is, and the finding by the SADC Observer Mission is, that the election in Zimbabwe wasn't legitimate. Before the election in Zimbabwe, you may have heard on this channel Dr. William Mpofu suggesting that all of the conditions for another coup in Zimbabwe are present. Quite a scary warning. Could we actually have a coup in SADC?
You know, Stephen, we might have that, but I think we have the SADC Troika and the organ. Your question is quite interesting, because we had a briefing somewhere else where we were talking about the same issue that you are raising of Zimbabwe. Constantine Chiwenga was not happy what happened after 2017, and also that some of his close, a grouping of his generals were moved by Emmerson Mnangagwa to become ambassadors, meaning there was still a tension between Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. But let's hope that they will sort out their issues. The issue also of the military coups that will happen in Eswatini, we cannot rule it out. Even South Africa, Stephen, we cannot rule it out in terms of the civilian stroke military coups in this country. So it is a matter of us not being the prophets of doom, but also being the analysts to assist this region to say that let's go back to the origins of democracy, to the origins of governance and the rule of law, so that we can know that the role of the military is not to be in the state house, but to be in the barracks.
Sipho Mantula, thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. A researcher at the Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs. Really do appreciate the time. Important conversations, of course, around what is happening on our continent and how it could have an impact on everyone in Africa.